Growth. Let's summarize what we have learned about growth and revisit this puppy scenario. Your learning target for the lesson is that you can construct a scientific explanation based on evidence for how two things, both environmental and genetic factors, influence the growth of organisms. Let's begin. So one of the big ideas to think about in this lesson is about growth. How do these, for instance, little tiny tadpoles grow into big frogs? And also to think about any of these questions. How does a living organism grow? How do you repair injuries? You know, when you cut yourself, your body fixes that. How does that happen? And then, of course, what we've been talking about is reproduction. How do you make a new baby? You may have surmised this, but in order to make repairs to a body or to get bigger or to make more of themselves, reproduce, organisms have to make new cells. So there's two possible ways to make new cells. Let's talk about these. So there are two ways to make new cells, mitosis and meiosis. And here you can see pictures of what that looks like. Here's a sketch, and here's what it looks like in an actual plant cell. So let's hear more about this. So there's two ways to get new cells, two processes. The first one's called mitosis. And if we look at what happens here, you basically start with one cell and you end up with two. So two cells are made, and the kind of cells that these become are body cells. So places in your body where you need to make new body cells, like skin, or when you're first developing in your mom's womb, all the different parts that are getting made are all body cells, right? Your heart, your bones, your stomach. When you look at the diagram here, they compare exactly the same as their parent up here. I know that here the chromosomes have doubled in order to make two cells, but basically you end up with two red and two blue chromosomes. So they compare to their parent the same. They're genetically the same. And they end up, if it's a human, 46 chromosomes. You started with 46 chromosomes up here, and each of these cells have 46. On the other hand, if you look at the other diagram, meiosis, it's basically two rounds of cell division. This first part is just like the second part. The only difference is that in the second round right here, the DNA is not copied. And so when it separates the second time, it only ends up with half the number of chromosomes. So if you look here, it's just one red and one blue chromosome ultimately. So you end up with 4 cells. Those cells become sex cells, either sperm if you're a boy or eggs if you're a girl. So sex cells, this happens in either the ovaries of the female or the testes if you're a male. And they compare in terms of how they compare genetically, they have half the number or amount of DNA. So 23 chromosomes each, which is what we want, because if you tried to combine 2 body cells, then every single time you multiplied, you would double your set of chromosomes, which is not what we want to happen. We want that 46 number to stay intact when sexual reproduction happens.
Our next great discovery sought to answer a question at the heart of biology: how cells form new life. You know, in the course of human events, this is all pretty recent, right?
Yes.
They found nuclei, there's cells around nuclei, animals and plants have cells.
Yes.
Then what happens next?
Well, after a gap of some 30 years or so, people began to see cells dividing.
Cell division is the process that the cell of a plant or an animal goes through to duplicate itself. While scientists had known about the process for decades, German zoologist Walter Flemming was the first to describe it and to publish his findings.
And his book was published in 1881. This book was momentous and extremely important in the history of cell biology because Flemming described cell division in a way which would be acceptable in a modern journal.
Fleming observed the process of cell division in great detail, with the help of a powerful new microscope and new dye staining techniques. With these innovations, he was able to identify structures that later were named chromosomes. And then, his great discovery. During cell division, the chromosomes undergo dynamic change. They divide into two identical parts, one for each daughter cell. Fleming called this process mitosis.
So that's the whole process of mitosis as he described it in 1881.
In a tadpole tail.
In a tadpole tail, yes.
And he knew to go to the tail because the tail is growing, or the back end of a tadpole, there's a lot going on.
Exactly, yes. He knew that if you're going to see cell division in detail, sorry for the pun.
I like the pun, kooky for the pun.
Then that was one of the places to look.
The splitting of chromosomes during mitosis was a breakthrough discovery. It opened the door for scientists to begin understanding how one cell can turn into a complex organism made of many interacting cells. Around the time that Walter Fleming was studying the cell division process, biologists already knew that fertilization resulted from the union of two sex cells, sperm and egg. What they didn't know was why these were the only types of cells in the body capable of reproducing new life. What made them different? The first answer was provided in 1883 by Belgian zoologist Edward van Beneden. Van Beneden was studying a species of roundworm when he discovered that nearly all of its cells contained 4 chromosomes. The only exceptions were the roundworm's sex cells, the male sperm and the female egg. These cells had only 2 chromosomes. Van Beneden observed that once 2 of the sex cells came together, a full set of 4 chromosomes appeared in the fertilized egg. But just why the sex cells had only half the number of chromosomes compared to all the other cells was still a mystery. Then in 1887, German biologist August Weismann entered the picture.
He knew about the work of Van Beneden, who had shown that the sperm and the egg bring in equal numbers of chromosomes. But Van Beneden's work had not really worked out the details of how the chromosomes were reduced in number.
He saw them go in half, and he saw them recombine.
He saw that the sperm and the egg brought in half the number of chromosomes as the body cell, but he didn't really know how they got rid of the half that they got rid of. So Weismann discussed how this might happen from a theoretical standpoint. And he said, well, what you could have would be that either every one of the chromosomes would just split in half, and half would go off one way and half would go another way, or you could have it more complicated, that the chromosomes could pair, and then instead of splitting, they just separate again.
After years of studying the behavior of chromosomes, Weismann determined that at some point a developing organism signals its sex cells to divide their number of chromosomes in half. Weismann called this very special form of cell division meiosis.
I think they will look back and see this as the golden age of biology, because, let's say, 200 years between 1800 and 2000, we went from not knowing what distinguished a stone from a frog, okay? And now we know the difference between a stone and a frog.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. So that, in a real sense, we've answered the old philosophical question of what is life. Maybe not to everybody's satisfaction, but we're well on the way.
The process of mitosis is essentially the same for all living things whose cells have a nucleus. There is, however, an important exception to how cells divide. This exception occurs when sex cells, sperm and eggs, are formed. The reason this is important becomes apparent when fertilization occurs. Suppose that a human sperm and egg each have the full set of 46 chromosomes that are in other human cells. When the sperm entered the egg, their chromosomes would combine. The resulting cell, the zygote, would then contain 2 complete sets of chromosomes totaling 92, twice what is normal. When the zygote divided, the 2 cells that formed would also have 92 chromosomes, and so would all the cells descended from them. This would mean that children would have twice as many chromosomes as their parents do. But this doesn't happen. Sperm and egg cells have only half the normal number of chromosomes. Human sperm and eggs, for example, have 23 chromosomes rather than 46. And when they combine during fertilization, the normal number of chromosomes, 46, is restored.
The reason sperm and eggs have half the normal number of chromosomes is that they are formed as a result of a different kind of cell division, meiosis rather than mitosis. Meiosis starts with special cells that are located in the female's ovaries and the male's testes. To simplify things, we'll show one of these cells as having only 4 chromosomes. Inside the cells, each chromosome makes an exact copy of itself. The original chromosome and its copy remain attached. The chromosomes condense and shorten, and the pairs of twin chromosomes line up in the middle of the cell as the membrane of the nucleus disappears. The pairs of twin chromosomes then move to opposite ends of the cell. The cell divides in 2, and a nuclear membrane forms around each set of chromosomes.
Each of these cells then goes through a second round of cell division. The twin chromosomes line up in the middle of each cell as the membrane of the nucleus disappears. Then the twin chromosomes break apart and move to opposite ends of each cell. And each cell divides in 2. Each of the 4 cells has half the number of chromosomes that were in the original cell before meiosis began. In this case, 2 chromosomes rather than 4. In males, the 4 cells that result from meiosis each grows a tail and turns into a sperm cell. In females, only 1 of the 4 cells produced by meiosis survives to become an egg.
Because sperm and egg cells are formed by meiosis rather than mitosis, every sexually reproducing species maintains the same number of chromosomes in its cells generation after generation. Alligators always have 32 chromosomes, and we humans always have 46.
So based on what you just learned, let's revisit the scenario of Sam's puppy. Look back in your notebook, mine's on page 120, and decide if you were right when you first looked at this. So which choice over here did you choose? And does that now match what you understood or know to be true about cells and growth? So hopefully you look over this and there's one that stands out as totally the right answer. And whoops, and that answer would be A, right? So were you right, yes or no? The correct answer is A, which basically means number of cells increase in order for growth to happen. Sorry, that's messy. Now, if you look carefully at the rest of the learning target, it wants you guys to be able to state what are the environmental and genetic factors that influence growth, that play a role in how big organisms get. So I want you to think about environmental factors first, and I'm going to show you a couple clips and see what you can write down on here.
Ouch! Dear Tim and Moby, this tree outside of school is an apple tree, but I only see pink flowers. Where are the apples? From Rachel. Up until a few weeks ago, our apple tree had pink flowers too. Whoa! Calm down, you'll get the apples back. Okay, these pink flowers have a job to do. They make seeds that grow into new apple trees. Flowers help their plants reproduce in a process called pollination. This little center part is called the pistil. The flower's female sex cells, or eggs, are inside of it. Around the pistil, you can see stamen with pollen on their ends. Male sex cells are in this pollen. Insects bring pollen from the stamen of one flower to the pistil of another. Male sex cells fertilize the plant egg. The seed starts to grow, and the ovary grows into a fruit, in this case, an apple. Those apples get ripe and fall off the tree. Sometimes they rot until all that's left are the seeds. A strong gust of wind might blow the seeds to a new place. Sometimes an animal eats the apple, digests it, and deposits the seeds elsewhere. However it happens, those seeds need to travel away from the mother plant and find their way back into the earth. Seeds are undeveloped plants with stored food in a protective covering. With the right amounts of light, water, oxygen, nutrients, and warm temperatures, a seed can germinate and grow into a seedling. After it bursts out of the ground, a seedling starts making food by a process called photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, the plant will use energy from sunlight to convert carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into simple sugars. Well, the soil still gives the plant nutrients and water, but photosynthesis provides the bulk of what the plant needs to grow big and strong. In vascular plants, things like flowering plants, ferns, and conifers, nutrients used for growing are delivered through special channels in the stem. Xylem is the system of tissues that delivers water and mineral nutrients up a plant stem. Xylem is actually the technical term for the wood of a tree. And phloem is the system of tissues that transports mainly sugar to all different parts of the plant so it can live and grow. Well, yeah. A hardy seedling will grow into a tree that makes seeds of its own. Plants that grow up to live for many growing seasons and to reproduce multiple times are called perennials. Trees and some shrubs are perennials. Other plants only live for 1 or 2 growing seasons, and they usually reproduce only once. These are called annuals. Many of the flowers you might buy to put in a flower box, and most field crops, are annuals. Wait a second. Okay, go ahead. Dear Bob, how fast does your body grow? From Midget Taz. Moby, you been opening Bob's mail again? Bob's not going to be happy that you opened his mail. But this is a good question. Most living things get bigger as they grow. I'm getting taller. Growth and development are controlled by hormones. Hormones are the chemical messengers that travel around in your blood and tell your body to do stuff, like start or stop growing. Your body doesn't grow by producing bigger cells. It grows by cell division. Cells in your body divide so that there are more of them. Most plants keep on growing the whole time they're alive. Animals, humans included, are different. Our cells divide at varying rates when we're young, and then slow down once we've fully matured. Babies grow really quickly at first, and then growth levels off for a while, until you hit the puberty growth spurt. During this time, you'll reach your full adult height. Your body's proportions change too. Ever notice how a baby's head looks really big in relation to its body? Bones seem hard, but they actually get longer to make you bigger. A human embryo's skeleton is mostly cartilage. Cartilage is a flexible connective tissue that bends easily. By the time you're born, your skeleton is about half cartilage. As you grow, that cartilage slowly becomes hard bone in a process called ossification. Before birth, bones grow from primary ossification centers in the bone's shaft. In childhood and adolescence, bones grow from secondary ossification centers that are near the bone's end. The growing end of a bone is called the epiphysis. Your bones keep growing until ossification is complete. After puberty, your body finishes off its growth. At this point, it's safe to assume that your shoes will fit for longer than 6 months. As your body continues to age, you may notice that things like jumping over fences are not as easy as they used to be. But you'll have experiences that keep you growing mentally. So you may not be able to run as fast when you get older, but your mind will improve. Everyone grows at different rates. Your genetic makeup, along with what you eat, determines how fast and how big you'll grow. Moby, robots don't grow. I stand corrected.
So hopefully you gathered several items for both plants and for animals here. That's something that we'll debrief probably tomorrow. Also, go back and think about your alien gizmo, your inheritance gizmo. What were the factors that influenced the size of the alien? And did you account for that over here?
Hey, these look exactly like the birthday flowers I gave to... Never mind, let's move on. Dear Tim and Moby, how do seed plants work? From Daniel. Oh, that's easy. To quote the great Sitting Bull, every seed is awakened, and all animal life. What? Alright, the real answer. Plants are one of the most diverse forms of life on Earth. Scientists have identified almost 300,000 species within the plant kingdom. All plants share a few traits. For one thing, they're eukaryotic, meaning each cell has a nucleus. They also contain cell walls made of cellulose. And most plant cells have chloroplasts, which conduct photosynthesis, a process that turns carbon dioxide into sugar. Right, so one major difference between plants is how they reproduce. Most plants sprout from a seed, which is basically a tiny, undeveloped plant in a protective coating. Other plants are seedless. You can watch our Seedless Plants movie for more on them. Seed plants are everywhere, from the trees in your neighborhood park, to the fruits and vegetables you eat, to all the colorful flowers in this garden. Some even grow underwater. All seed plants are vascular. Specialized channels carry water and nutrients throughout their bodies. Well, it all starts with the roots, the parts of the plant that are usually underground. They keep the plant firmly anchored in the soil, preventing it from being washed or blown away. They also absorb water and nutrients, which travel up through the stem. Stems can be soft and green, like in tulips or grass, or hard and woody, like tree trunks. A stem is sort of like the spine of the plant, providing support for growing branches, leaves, and flowers. It also carries water and nutrients from the roots to the rest of the plant. No, not all of those nutrients come from the soil. A plant's leaves provide more food through photosynthesis. Ah yes, seed plants are divided into two groups based on how they reproduce. In angiosperms, the seeds are located inside a flower. After the seeds are pollinated, the flower becomes a fruit. The seeds inside it can sprout new plants. Most plants on Earth are angiosperms. They grow in forests, deserts, water, and even sidewalk cracks. Monocots and dicots are the two classes of angiosperms. Monocots have one seed leaf inside of their seeds, dicots have two. That little distinction is pretty major when you look at the differences in the plants they produce. For one thing, the flowers of monocots have parts in multiples of 3, while the flowers of dicots have parts in multiples of 4 or 5. Yep, that belongs to the gymnosperms, a group of seed plants that produce no flowers or fruit. Instead, most gymnosperms use cones to reproduce. There are male and female cones, but only the female ones have seeds. They're located at the base of the cone's scales. Many gymnosperms are evergreens. They keep their needle-like leaves year-round. Conifers, cycads, ginkgos, and neophytes are all classified as gymnosperms. But conifers are probably the type you see most often. Well, just try to imagine life without seed plants. They're the basis of our diets, and we make all kinds of stuff with them, from clothing and furniture to medicines and soap. Plus, they suck CO2, a greenhouse gas, out of the air and emit oxygen. Hey, Rita. Can I call you back? Oh, be quiet. You're so immature. Sign here. Okie doke. Huh. Dear Moby, last year I planted a couple of flowers in my backyard, and this year there are dozens. I didn't plant any more, so what happened? From Merrill. Hey, why is this only addressed to you? All those new flowers that popped up grew from seeds that came out of the original few. There's a whole lot that goes on before you even get a seed. Flowers reproduce by pollination and then fertilization. I guess it's time for that little talk about the birds and the bees. If you've ever sniffed a flower and sneezed, you've probably got some pollen in your nose. In order for a new seed to form, pollen from the stamen of one flower must be carried to the pistil of another flower. For trees and grass, the wind acts as a pollinator, blowing the pollen to other plants far and wide. Many flowers are pollinated by insects. Flowering plants have evolved colors, smells, shapes, and nectar to attract unwitting pollinators to their reproductive parts. The most famous pollinator is the honeybee. The honeybee lands on a flower to gather nectar. It brushes against the anthers and gets a dusting of pollen. The nectar is so tasty to bees that they don't stop with just one flower. On the next flower, the honeybee leaves some of the pollen behind, and a pollen grain is collected by the pistil. The grain of pollen grows a thin tube that travels down the pistil until it meets an ovule. Fertilization happens when the male pollen and female ovule combine. The fertilized ovule eventually grows into a seed, which can become a new plant. Not all flowers are pollinated by bees. Some flowers are pollinated by other insects, hummingbirds, bats, or even water. Flowering plants have special relationships with the animals that pollinate them. It works out for both of them. The plant gets pollinated and the bee gets food. Moby? Where are you?
The last bit of your notes is just to consider what are the genetic factors that also influence growth. So you have some examples that we'll discuss on the left-hand side, and there's a video clip. So as you watch the video clip, I want you to consider some words, some vocabulary words, which we'll come back to again next week. Alleles, and then the words dominant and recessive, which you guys have actually heard about before when you guys did the alien gizmo. So think about how that applies to traits. So really what you could say is that genes determine an organism's characteristics, ultimately how well or how big something will end up growing. So for instance, the size of these cattle. Some genes are going to make the standard size cattle that are 62 inches tall, but if you have a different version of the gene, you might be a smaller stature, a miniature or a micro miniature cattle, under 36 inches. The same is true of plants. If we look at these tomatoes, there's genes that control color and the shape and size of tomatoes. Think of all the different kinds of tomatoes there are. Grape tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, Roma tomatoes, beefsteak tomatoes. Those are all genetically controlled features and characteristics. So there is more coming on that part of this unit next week.